It's the second week with the team working on the renovation of the roof, and having removed all of the tiles and the wooden slats, this week has been all about the walls, beams and rafters, including moving a lot of stones and removing a lot of rotten wood. And then preparing the tops of the walls and the steel beams for the new roof layers, which has included some unexpected work, which has proved a little bit nerve-wracking. At the start of the week, the focus was on being ready for the arrival of a big truck on day 2 that would be helping lift out the remaining beams. And the team arrived on site early to make a fast start to their prep work. And while they went straight to the work area, I got a bit of light into some other areas. The team's prep work was mostly going to be on the walls, and to help this work, they lifted in some extra planks for their scaffolding. And I started work clearing an outside area they wanted to use later on. The main prep work for the team was loosening the connections between the beams and the stone walls. They now had a radio on site playing a lot of old tunes to accompany their work. There were a few comments in the last video about the terminology I was using for the different roof parts. The team call the bigger wooden structures bigas, which translates as beams, but they probably are rafters, but I've tended to still call them beams in this video, and I'm sorry if that's not quite right. Anyway, the team were making good progress on loosening these when the boss was on site, both checking on progress and confirming some measurements in relation to the wall and the steel beam. While the team finished loosening up the wood, I checked the Reolink camera's videos from the weekend. And while I was doing this, the team were actually able to start taking out some of the wood beams by hand that were smaller and lower down. But the bigger, heavier beams in the center, like this one, were going to require a strong crane to lift out. And with all the beams now ready for lifting out, the team could start on other work that would be needed for later on. First, tidying up various parts of the walls for later work on a ring beam and the cornice. And then, after their mid-morning break, they started to put up some exterior scaffolding. While the team are putting up the scaffolding outside, and before these last remaining beams are taken down, which should be tomorrow, I thought I'd take this opportunity to give a bit of an explanation as to exactly why we are doing all of this work on the roof now. And quite a few of those reasons relate to this area here and the area above. First of all, you may recall that when I bought the house, there was a big hole in the roof there, and the temporary cover we had on there was always going to need replacing. So I was always going to have to do total roof work on that part there. And then another aspect relating to this area is, you may recall that this wall here has got a few big cracks running through it, and the architect and the main builder are very clear that the best way to be able to repair those is to get a ring beam around all of the wall there, and in fact all of the walls where we're changing the roof. And then once that ring beam is holding the wall in place, it'll be much easier to repair that wall in particular and to repair this one behind me here. And then the next reason for the work is that while we've managed to keep the rainwater out more recently, we've had to do a lot of patching up of the tiles in this area in particular, where rainwater was coming through. And before I bought the house, I think there must have been some pretty significant problems, because a lot of these beams in particular had had a lot of water going on them and had become really rotten. And therefore, we really have got to change these beams to give me some assurance that they're not all going to collapse at some stage in the future. So we'll take a closer look at some of them now. The beams in this section are particularly bad and have either got very, very damp and rotten, or have seen quite a lot of termite action. And there really isn't any solution but to replace these, especially as above them it was incredibly difficult to create any sort of level layer because of the different sizes and shapes of those beams. And then a final note about the reasons for doing the work in this space, which is actually going to be part of phase 2, is just to highlight again that a lot of these beams, or we might call them rafters, are getting very rotten, and it's because of rain coming through the tile levels above them. And there are a couple of reasons for the water coming through those flat tiles in the first layer above the beams. And that is that they're not all exactly the same depth. So there's a bit of unevenness and water can move through those cracks. And the second reason is that there isn't actually any mortar or any material making them watertight and sealing them. So there's quite a lot of gaps running between the tiles where any water gets into can just drop down. And that's happened in a couple of places where one or two beams have probably had decades of water dripping onto them, and therefore they've become really rotten. So the solution we're following is going to take all of those flat tiles out and put a different material on top so that we can make it completely watertight. Well, I hope that was a useful explanation as to some of the main reasons of why we're doing this total renovation of the roof. And there's a few more explanations I do need to give about certain parts of the work, but I'll be doing that as the work progresses further. Now I'm going to head back outside and check how the guys are getting on with the scaffolding. With the exterior scaffolding in place, for the last part of the day they returned to some more wall work and adjusting some of the interior scaffolding, while Fodo and I started work separating out stones that will be used later from the general rubble. It was another early start on day 2, albeit a bit lighter without so much cloud around. And we briefly did some more tidying up before the truck arrived, although we didn't have to wait long. The truck was delivering materials for work next week and steel beams for the one section on the wall. And it would then be lifting out the remaining wood beams and taking away those in worse condition. First up was the lifting of rebar columns onto the roof that will be used for the ring beam. Then it was the lifting up and into place of the new steel beams. Next, the dropping off of the materials, both at the back and the side of the house. And then the picking up of the more rotten beams already removed. And then the lifting out of those that were still on the roof. During the work by the truck, I had tried to stay out of the way and not distract the team too much. But once it had finished, I was able to check out the results and the impact on how things now looked. First, from above. And then from below. Then it was back to work on the walls for the team and the rubble for me. With all the beams now gone, the team could now put in corner profiles and string lines to guide the exact work on the walls. And after a brief lunch for me, Enric was back to confirm the string lines, especially in relation to the existing steel beam. And I returned to my duties on getting water set up for work next week, even though the team's request was to change a bit later on in the week. And with wall work for the day complete, and with the new materials organised, the team finished for the day. While I had the pleasure of showing the house to Peter and Liz, who follow the channel from Austin, Texas, but who were in Catalonia and France for a holiday and dropped in en route with a very generous gift of some tasty Texas pralines. Peter and Liz, I hope the holiday is going well. Day 3 was an early start for a meeting with the technical architect to confirm the plans for the existing steel beam, which was not in the exact position we now wanted it to be for the new wooden beams that we would be placing on top. It is actually 2 beams that we put in place earlier in the year in work that featured in video 31. At the time, I think we all thought it was in exactly the right place for both the future work and, more importantly, to hold up the old wooden rafters prior to this phase of roof work. But for reasons I might try to explain in another video, it was now 8 centimeters higher than we wanted, and it was agreed that it would be better and probably quicker to lower the steel beam rather than make any changes to the ends of the new wooden beams. So the team got started on preparing for doing this while I had to leave for an appointment off-site. When I was back, 2 of the team were finishing work on removing the brackets we had used for holding the old beams, while the rest of us continued with other work. In my case, getting another area ready for a change in how the team wanted their water supply next week. And with the brackets removed, the team then propped up both ends of the steel beam and got ready for loosening its connection to the wall and removing material below it, so that they could then carefully lower the props and the beam into position. For all of this work, I was watching from the sideline and trying not to distract the team by filming too close, so I'm sorry that I wasn't able to show some of the process more clearly. Although the team were very focused and confident, I was still pretty nervous about the work, and at times it was good to look away and enjoy the view. But after getting both ends to the right level, everything was a little less tense, and the team got on with getting the beam exactly level and reconnected to the walls. The day ended for me with more prep work on water deposits, and then releasing some tension from the day by smashing up some rubble while I waited for a meeting on site with some mechanical engineers. The next day I was back early to open up, and take the next step on the new water setup. And the team were back with some more materials and equipment for some of the next phases of work. And having got set up, they returned to work on the beam and wall connections. While I tested out the setup for getting water into a bidon at the back of the house for work next week. Later in the morning, I had to go to another meeting off-site. And when I was back, I checked on the team's progress, with work on the wall edges and the new steel beams, which was now their focus for the rest of the week, in order to be ready for the delivery of new wooden beams early next week. And continuing my theme of work on the water setup, I made some repairs to the control box of the well. On the last day of the week, I was off-site to start with, and I arrived as the boss and his team reviewed plans for next week and the final prep needed that day, which would mostly be on the levelling of the walls where the new beams will be, using stones that had been removed earlier and a fair amount of mortar. While the rest of the day for me involved repairs to the well hosepipe, moving old rafters, and later on plenty of rubble shifting. And there was also another visit, this time from some British neighbours who have a house further down the hill and who were back for a week's holiday. And that is the end of work for this week, which has started to see some prep work in this area after delivery of more equipment and some more materials. While down there are some of the old rafters that were in better condition that I want to keep for using in the future. And there are also some planks for some scaffolding. And in this area there is some more rubble, and a lot of scaffolding has been added to this section of the wall, which will start to be used a bit more when the team start working from the outside on the cornice of the roof. But this week has been all about removing all the old materials off the roof and preparing for the new ones, with some careful extra work adjusting and preparing that steel beam, which could only start after all of the old rafters had been lifted out from these spaces. And then the team were able to start all of their prep work along the top of these walls and on the new steel beams in this corner, ready for work next week, most of which will be happening on the other side of this wall, where we now have various materials ready and from where the new beams will be lifted up and in. So please do tune in next week to see how we get on.